Back in November, a comic book discovered by three brothers in a box in their late mother's attic sold at auction for over $9 million, becoming the most valuable comic book in the world. That comic was this comic, Superman #1. I mean, not literally this comic. I've done okay with this YouTube gig over the years, but I ain't got $9 million lying around to spend on comics, especially when reprints like this one are available for so much less. This is the facsimile edition of Superman #1 that DC published a few years ago, an exact duplicate of the original edition, which was published in May 1939 with a June 1939 cover date. Since it was just auctioned for such a massive price tag, I thought it would be fun to make a video about what's actually in this issue. Yes, the originals from 1939 that survive are valuable collector's items. Yes, it's a landmark in comics history because it's the first superhero comic devoted entirely to a single character. But what's in it? What are the stories? Is there anything that makes Superman #1 special besides the fact that it's Superman #1? The answer is yes. Superman #1 contains some of my favorite stories from the early years of the character. The problem is, all the stories in Superman #1 are reprints of stories that were originally published the year before in Action Comics, and I already talked about most of them in a previous video in this series, so I don't know. I'll figure something out. Oh, okay, here's something. It's not all reprints. There is some new stuff, a bit of original material Siegel and Schuster added to the reprinted stories to sweeten the pot, those clever boys. The issue begins with an expanded retelling of Superman's origin story, and it's this version that actually establishes the broad strokes of that origin that are still more or less followed whenever that story is retold today. Action Comics #1 begins with an efficient single-page version of the origin that gives us the basics. Where Superman comes from, what his powers are, the fact that he uses his powers to help those in need and be a champion of the oppressed. In Superman #1, Siegel and Schuster expand that a little to give us a better idea of, to paraphrase a line from Batman's origin story, who Superman is and how he came to be. The story begins with this beautiful panel showing Superman's spaceship escaping as the planet Krypton explodes behind it. I love this panel because not only is it a wonderful image of classic pulp sci-fi in its own right, it's the beginning of the story, and Krypton has already exploded, which serves to validate my theory. Krypton doesn't matter. Are you a Superman writer wondering what you should do with Krypton? The answer is nothing. The most important thing that could ever be done with Krypton has already been done. It blew up. Anyway, after that, we get the discovery of Superman's ship by the Kents. They find the baby inside the rocket ship and immediately turn him over to an orphanage. That might strike us as cold-hearted today, but put yourself in their position. They're described as elderly, which by the standards of the time meant they were probably in their early 40s? Plus, if Superman is just starting out as Superman in the late 1930s, that means that the Kents found him as a baby during the 1910s? There was a war on, and an influenza pandemic. They weren't trying to have kids. Little Clark is lucky they didn't just leave him in that field to let nature take its course. People did that shit back then. They didn't care. Don't judge them too harshly, though. Clark's only in the orphanage for one panel. The Kents come back and say, hey, can we have that baby we dropped off here the other day? We thought it over and we'd like to adopt him. Baby Clark already has his superpowers and has apparently been trashing the place, so the head of the orphanage is only too happy to send him home with the Kents. I get a chuckle from the outdated vocabulary here. It's technically not called an orphanage, it's called an orphan's asylum. And when the Kents come back to adopt Clark, the head honcho thinks to himself, thank goodness they're taking him away before he wrecks the asylum, which, to my modern ear, makes it sound like the place is an institution for insane babies. A thought I find both tragic and hilarious. Next, we get a panel of the Kents offering some moral instruction to young Clark. Pa Kent tells him to hide his powers from others, while Ma Kent emphasizes that when the time comes, he must also use his powers to help others. You want to talk about efficient storytelling? Look at how many ideas from this single panel took hold and became defining characteristics of Superman. We've got Clark's upbringing by the Kents being his inspiration to become a hero. We've got a reasonable justification for the secret identity. Interestingly, this justification didn't quite stick, did it? The usual excuse for Clark maintaining a double identity as Superman is that he does it to protect the people who are close to him, so that Superman's enemies can't strike at him through his loved ones. Here, Pa tells him to keep his powers secret so that he doesn't scare other people, which is different, but I like it too. It still suggests that part of the reason for the secret identity is to protect others. If he's going to use his powers to do good, he can't be a cause of fear in those he's trying to help. And finally, we've got Ma Kent telling Clark, you must use your powers to assist humanity. We associate the concept of with great power comes great responsibility with Spider-Man, and obviously that particular phrase belongs exclusively to old Webhead, but when it comes to the basic idea, as with so many other basic ideas found in superhero comics, Superman did it first. There's a simple appeal at the heart of the Superman character. James Gunn's Superman movie understood it, and we see it expressed here in Superman #1. Sometimes selfish teenagers or cynical adults will ask, why wouldn't he use his powers to get rich? Or to spy on the women's locker room? Why does he use his powers to help people? And the answer is, because he's a good person, and he can. It's not complicated. There it is in 2 lines of dialogue from the Kents in a single panel. The following page, we get a summary of Clark growing up, exploring his powers, leaping incredible distances. Remember, he can't exactly fly yet. Gorilla pressing cars, outracing trains, laughing at a befuddled doctor who just broke another needle against his impenetrable skin, as if it's that guy's fault. Perhaps an early glimmer of what a petty asshole Superman was capable of being in the Golden and Silver Ages. Once again, look at how resonant these simple panels turned out to be throughout the history of the character. Richard Donner took the image of Clark racing a train and turned it into an iconic and iconically goofy scene in his first Superman film. And while we don't get the words, we get the scenes that later inspired a couple of elements of the memorable introduction heard in the Fleischer animated shorts, the radio show, and the 1950s George Reeves TV series. More powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Speaking of tall buildings, there's a reminder of how much Superman's backstory has changed over the decades, because here it sure seems like he grew up in the city, doesn't it? He didn't learn to hurdle skyscrapers as a boy in Kansas, did he? There's no mention at all of Smallville. There's no mention at all of the Kents being farmers. Those pieces of the puzzle wouldn't be fitted in until later. At the bottom of the page, we get a melancholy panel of Clark standing at the graves of his parents with a caption telling us that it was the deaths of the Kents that finally convinced Clark to put on a costume and become Superman, to dedicate his life to using his abilities to do good for the world. That's kind of sweet, right? He does it for his parents, to honor their memories by living out the values they instilled in him. I do have some questions, though. We get this panel of Clark standing at their graves, and the deaths of his parents are referred to collectively. The passing away of his foster parents greatly grieved Clark Kent, but it strengthened a determination that had been growing in his mind. As though it was a single event. So, did Ma and Pa Kent die at the same time? Was it one of those situations where an old couple has been together for like 50 years and one of them dies and then the other dies a few days later, as if they couldn't bear to go on without their partner? Were they in a car accident? Is that part of why Clark feels so bad? He wasn't there to save them? He was distracted, off racing a train or getting his reps in, pressing an automobile over his head? Wait, were Ma and Pa Kent in the car that Clark was pressing over his head? and Clark was pushing himself, trying to break his record, and he was struggling on that last rep that he couldn't quite make it, and he dropped the car and it flipped upside down and landed that way, and his poor parents were crushed to death inside? Is that what happened? Was Clark Kent accidentally, but directly, responsible for the deaths of both his parents? Beat that, Spidey! Or is there another explanation for the Kents' seemingly simultaneous expiration? Did one of them kill the other and then do a self-checkout? A Metropolis murder-side, the old Gig Young special. Who did who, do you think? Did Pa take out Ma, or was it the other way around? I wish Jerry Siegel were still alive. I'd go to a convention and stand in line just to see the look on his face when I asked him that question. However they died, suspiciously at the same time, Clark goes straight from his parents' graves to the offices of a major metropolitan newspaper that is not yet named the Daily Planet. Originally, it was the Daily Star. Clark walks in like, "Hey, let me talk to the editor." And the secretary says, "Yeah, sure, go talk to him. He loves it when I send random people off the street in to bother him." Clark walks into the editor's office like, "Hey, I don't have any experience, but give me a job." The editor, who remains nameless in this issue but is eventually called George Taylor and then a little while later renamed Perry White by the writers of the Adventures of Superman radio show, tells Clark to scram. Determined to get a job as a reporter, because if he can be the first to hear about breaking news, he can be more effective as a hero, Clark changes into his Superman costume, overhears the editor talking on the phone about a mob attacking the county jail, and races off to stop anyone from getting hurt, and also to get the story and impress the editor so he can get a job, but mostly to stop anyone from getting hurt. The mob batters down the door of the jail and drags this guy, Sims, outside. They're preparing to hang him from a tree growing conveniently nearby when Soups arrives on the scene and says, "Nobody's getting hanged unless a judge says so. Now pound tar!" The mob doesn't like being bossed around by Superman, so Superman beats up the mob. Once he's safely back in his cell, Sims tells Superman, "Look, in exchange for saving my life, I'll give you a tip that will help you save my life again. I'm in jail for the murder of Jack Kennedy, but I didn't do it. Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Why are there so many people who just refuse to believe that it was Oswald? I don't get it." Different Jack Kennedy. What Sims actually tells Superman is that there's someone else who's been arrested for the killing of Jack Kennedy, a woman named Evelyn Curry, who is being executed for the crime tonight. So wait, this guy Sims and Evelyn Curry were both arrested for the murder of Jack Kennedy, but this Sims guy is still sitting in the county jail while Evelyn Curry is going to the chair for it tonight? Sexist? Sims tells Superman that the real killer of Kennedy is B. Carroll, the nightclub singer, who killed Kennedy for cheating on her and then framed Evelyn Curry. And also Sims is involved in some way that is not at all clear. Superman's like, "Thanks for the info, chump," and immediately calls it into the editor at the Daily Star. He says, "So, do I get the job?" And the editor goes, "Yeah, sure. It's the 30s, and this is a comic book for children. Nobody will ever question the plausibility of this." Later, Clark goes to the nightclub where B. Carroll sings. He catches her act as Clark, then changes into Superman and surprises her in her dressing room like, "I know it was you who killed Kennedy. It wasn't me. It was the Mafia. It was the Mossad. It was George H.W. Bush. It was LBJ. It wasn't me, I tell you." Different Jack Kennedy. You're wasting your breath denying it. Sims told me the whole story, except for the details of why the cops think he had something to do with it, which you'd think would have been of paramount importance to him given his situation. B's like, "Say, you sure fill out those tights nicely, don't you? Maybe we can work out some arrangement that doesn't involve me getting arrested." Superman's like, "Sorry, Toots, the only lady I'll be making love to tonight is named Justice. She does it blindfolded. She's kinky like that." B pulls a gun like, "I hate it when men I'm attracted to sleep with other people. You'll pay for this. But first, okay, yes, I did kill Jack Kennedy for your information. Now take this." But before she can even pull the trigger, Superman snatches the gun, crushes it, and forces B to sign a confession she signs after being threatened by an incredibly strong stranger in a bright blue unitard who snuck into her dressing room. I'm sure that'll hold up in court. Superman scoops her up under his arm and dives out the window, and everything from this point on is a reprint of the first Superman story ever published from Action Comics #1. Supes races to the governor's mansion, pushes his way in, presents the governor with the signed confession of the real killer, and the governor gets on the phone and stops the execution of Evelyn Curry. What's interesting about the reprint in the context of its inclusion here is how thoughtful Siegel and Schuster were in crafting the new material so that it doesn't detract from the original story. For example, when Bee pulls the gun on Superman in her dressing room, the obvious thing to happen next is for her to shoot and for the bullets to bounce off of Superman's chest. But that doesn't happen. Instead, Superman just grabs the gun out of her hand and crushes it, a move George Reeves would make one of his trademarks as Superman on TV in the 1950s. Why doesn't Bee shoot Superman in the dressing room? Because later on, in the material reprinted from Action Comics #1, the governor's butler shoots Superman after he breaks into the mansion, and that's where the bullet bounces off Superman's chest bit happens. Siegel and Schuster came up with a different way for Superman to respond to having a gun pulled on him for the scene in B. Carroll's dressing room to avoid making the scene where the butler shoots him redundant. I love picking up on little details like that. It reminds me that Superman didn't just appear out of the ether and immediately take on a life of his own. He was the creation of two artists, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who knew what they were doing from the beginning and who got really good at it really fast. I have a great admiration for that original Action Comics #1 story, but the obvious and rapid improvement in both the writing and the artwork of Superman is truly a marvel to behold, and you can see it in both the original and reprinted material in Superman #1. The style and complexity of Joe Shuster's artwork would continue to evolve, as would Jerry Siegel's writing, and soon enough their efforts would be aided and ultimately exceeded by those of other artists who contributed to the character. But even within the first few months of the character's existence, as seen in the Superman stories from the earliest issues of Action Comics, reprinted here in Superman #1, the speed and scale of that evolution is remarkable. Here's how Superman looks in his very first appearance in Action Comics #1. Here he is in Action Comics #4. Look how the emblem on his chest has gone from a nondescript yellow triangle to a shield. Here he is on one of the pages of new material for Superman #1 with that familiar profile, determined, squinting expression, and curl of black hair across his forehead. There's still a lot of inconsistency in the art from story to story and even from panel to panel, but it's clear that Siegel and Schuster are trying things and figuring things out and getting better and better with each subsequent adventure. There's one thing Siegel and Schuster had figured out from the beginning, and it's evident in both the original material they produced for Superman #1 and every reprinted story. Superman was meant to be a man of the people. Repeatedly throughout the book, he is described as the champion of the oppressed, someone who uses his power to protect the weak and to seek justice for those to whom it has been denied. In the first story, he saves an innocent woman from being wrongfully executed and takes a detour to stop a man from beating his wife. In the second, he intervenes to stop a war that has been contrived by a profiteering arms manufacturer. In the third, he exposes the unsafe labor practices of a wealthy mine owner. And in the fourth, he abducts, drugs, and impersonates a football player to prevent a crooked coach from winning a big game. They weren't all two-fisted tales of social justice, okay? Some of them were just weird. Like I mentioned earlier, I already did a video about the early Action Comic stories that are reprinted here. It's the second video I ever did for this Best Superman Ever series. In fact, go check it out if you want to hear my thoughts on those stories in more detail. There is one more piece that is original to Superman #1. It comes after the reprint of the wacky football story from Action Comics #4, and it is its own kind of oddball curiosity because even though it's a Superman story printed in a Superman comic, it's not a comic. It's a work of prose, a Superman short story written by Jerry Siegel with a few small illustrations by Joe Shuster. A squad of cops, led by Sergeant Blake, responds to a frantic call from a patent attorney whose office Superman has just trashed. I'm guessing the patent attorney was up to something crooked, or else Superman just has an all-encompassing hatred of patent law and all those who practice it. Honestly, at this point in the character's history, it could go either way. The cops think they've got Superman trapped in an elevator, but when the elevator reaches the bottom floor and opens, they're shocked to find only mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent inside. After convincing the cops that he doesn't know anything about Superman, Clark tags along with Sergeant Blake to police headquarters and is on hand when infamous murderer Biff Dugan escapes. Blake blames Clark for Dugan's escape, so naturally, Clark knocks Sergeant Blake unconscious. Siegel writes, Clark Kent looked at the sergeant's recumbent figure, muttered, "Sorry, but I haven't time to use kid gloves." Then, with amazing rapidity, he stripped off his glasses and outer garments, revealing himself clad in a weird, close-fitting costume and flaring cape. In this apparel, it was apparent that he really possessed a fine physique of breathtaking symmetry. One lithe leap brought him to the windowsill. There, he poised momentarily, while his keen telescopic vision surveyed the vicinity. And then, as he sighted the figure of Biff scrambling into a parked auto, he dived out into space. It's a nice little story. Very short, with some clever moments. Siegel's prose is direct and unpretentious. I recommend checking it out, should you be inspired to get your hands on a copy of Superman #1, presumably online or in the form of a reprint. Like this one, I'm assuming an original printing is well out of the price range of anybody watching this shit. The prose story, along with the rest of Superman #1, reminds us of a few things about that original Superman that it's easy to forget almost 90 years after the character's debut. Superman is pulpy. Superman doesn't get along with cops. Superman is himself a criminal. That prose story ends with Sergeant Blake grudgingly acknowledging Superman's help in reapprehending Biff Dugan, but also swearing to arrest him at the first opportunity, and Superman exists to fight for truth and justice, not power and property. You get all of that in this one comic book. Is that worth $9 million? I have no idea. How do you even put a price on the best Superman ever?